Okay, unscrambling the egg. This is, as I said earlier, this is what happens when things don't go well. You have people, I mean, some of what you do is life or death, right? So we have to put patients, clients first. In healthcare, I've always advised my clients, whether they be the person who's leaving or the person who's staying or the practice, is if you put the goodwill of the patients first as your guiding post, you'll be good. And what that means is if you have a chart for a patient and that patient wants to go with the other practice when you unscramble the egg, you follow HIPAA, but you get the chart to the other practice, right? You don't make it hard for the patient. Who gets tangible assets and how valued? That should be in the operating, the document that you set out. Office space, as we talked about. Who gets that? The lease will be with the entity. How are you going to divide that up? Sometimes you might want to wait until the lease is up so that you don't have exposure on that. The intangible assets, the name of the business phone numbers, the URLs, the website, all those things that are important and have value, who gets those when you're unscrambling the egg? And then finally, the restrictions against competition. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but as you get into bigger provider arrangements, it's not uncommon for the new employer to say, okay, we're going to pay you this, but in exchange for this nice salary, if you leave, you can't compete. You can't practice within a 10-mile radius. Okay, and that is a very interesting area of the law that really does warrant a half a day, which I won't take, but they're enforceable in North Carolina. And I have, once, I won't say once a month, but more than once a year, I have a provider. They're usually an MD. I love MDs, but they're very, very, they know a lot. And they tell me they're not enforceable. And I'll say to my wife, yes, they are. She's an MD. So I'll say, yes, they are. Well, I'm not. They're not. I've got a brother-in-law who practices in Arizona, and they're not. Well, you're right. In Arizona, they're not. But in North Carolina, they are. And as long as they're signed and they're, yes, ma'am.
I've heard that myself. Where is that coming from? Who's perpetuating that idea that if you're not enforceable on us?
Okay. Several theories on that. One is they're not enforceable in every state. Second is we do have non-competes that are struck by courts. Courts hate them. So you have to go, if there's litigation over it, you have to go to court and you have to show that they're in writing. So we agree, all agreements don't have to be in writing to be enforced, but a non-compete does. It has to be supported by adequate consideration, which is sometimes an issue. If you start to work somewhere and they ask you to sign a non-compete 3 weeks after you start, and they don't give you a raise, they don't give you benefits, it's just while you're here, it's not enforceable. It's in our state, we don't view continued employment as adequate consideration. So that's a reason. It has to be reasonable as to time, activity restricted, and geographic region. Okay? So if I say, you're going to work for me as a therapist, and for 5 years you can't work in the state of North Carolina, that's too broad. And our courts don't rewrite them. They do what's called a blue pencil, which is they'll strike what's unenforceable, leave what's left or what's unreasonable. And the fourth thing is it can't violate public policy, meaning if courts have gone through that analysis and said it's adequate consideration, it's in writing, it's reasonable, but if I enforced it, the public would be deprived of a needed service. That's a little different in Winston-Salem with two pretty vibrant health systems than it might be in Let me think, smaller town, you know. It's just, it might be different in, I'm trying to think of a small town in North Carolina, if anybody's from one, yell it out. But it's just, if you could enforce a non-compete against a cardiologist in Winston-Salem, because there are 25 cardiologists in Winston-Salem, right? If you're in Southport, you might not be able to do it because there aren't 25 cardiologists there. And they need a cardiologist to serve the population. So that's my guess is there's anecdotal evidence that courts strike them. My advice on non-competes, and I know I need to wrap up, but my advice on non-competes is never, ever, ever, ever sign one thinking that it's not enforceable. Okay? You can sign one. You can make that decision yourself whether you understand what it means if you're comfortable with what it means. But your time to negotiate the non-compete is before you sign it. Because after you sign it, and you truly are, that is expensive, expensive, expensive litigation. It's time intensive. It's a big burst right at the front. And we've done it. But what happens 9 times out of 10 is somebody will come in and will say, we feel pretty good. We think we can bust this non-compete. We're going to have to go to court. We're going to have to do a temporary restraining order, and we're going to get a preliminary injunction hearing. We think we can bust it. We think it's too broad. We think based on these cases. And then we say, but we probably need $50,000 up front because we're working nonstop. And usually the people who are enforcing it have that money, right? So if it's an employer who's enforcing it, they can enforce it without taking home less money. You can't fight it. So what happens 9 times out of 10 is the provider who is probably right that it's unenforceable says, you know what, I'm going to do locums work for a year and not spend money. And I tell them that. I wouldn't pay me to do it. I mean, we'll do it, but I wouldn't pay me to do it. I would never tell a client, I'll take your money because I think we're going to lose, right? But if I think we're going to win and you want to take the risk, yeah, we'll do that. But if you ask me, I wouldn't do it. I'd just go work. Go up to Carroll County in Virginia and work for 12 months or however long the non-compete is, come back down and work. It's a cost benefit you have to go through, and I digressed on that. But that's a big deal, is that the non-compete from an organizational standpoint, when you merge, holds people together, right? It does. It holds people together. I don't like them, but when I represent practices, we do it. Okay. A little bit longer than a Thanksgiving blessing, but any questions? If you don't have any now and you see me out there, feel free to let me know. I'm happy to answer what I can. But I appreciate your attention. Thank you.